They said he confessed. They said it was over. But what if the words that sealed your fate weren't even yours? This is the story of David Keller, a working-class father from Ohio who spent 12 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. A confession beaten out of him by a system that cared more about closing a case than finding the truth. It began one ordinary night in 1998, when a single phone call changed his life forever.
Chapter 1. The Call. David Keller was the kind of man who fixed things. Cars, fences, leaky faucets. He worked the night shift at a steel plant, paid his bills on time, and loved his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, more than anything. That February evening, snow fell heavy outside his small ranch home in Akron. He had just come home from work when the phone rang. On the other end, a police officer said calmly, "Mr. Keller, we need you to come down to the station. It's about your neighbor, Denise Harper." Denise lived 2 doors down. She was friendly, quiet. That night, she'd been found dead in her living room, strangled. David frowned, confused. I barely knew her, but the officer insisted. An hour later, David drove through the snow, headlights cutting through fog, unaware that he was driving straight into a trap. Chapter 2, The Interrogation. At the precinct, they told him it would only take a few minutes. It didn't. Detective Ron Mercer, a tall man with slick-back brown hair, steel blue eyes, and a reputation for results, walked in with a folder under his arm. He sat down on the table and said softly, "David, we just want to clear up a few things." For 14 hours straight, they questioned him. No lawyer, no sleep, no food. They told him they found his fingerprints on a glass in Denise's kitchen. They told him neighbors saw his truck parked near her house that night. They told him the DNA didn't lie. But none of it was true. By 3 a.m., David was shivering in his chair. By 4 a.m., his hands were trembling. By 5 a.m., he whispered the words they wanted to hear. "Yes, I did it." A confession born not of guilt, but exhaustion. Chapter 3, The Sentence. When the court-appointed lawyer arrived the next morning, it was already too late. David's taped confession played for the jury. He sounded calm, composed, like a man remembering what he'd done. They didn't hear the part where he was threatened with losing his daughter. They didn't see the bruises on his wrists. They didn't know the DNA evidence was still pending. The verdict came swift, guilty, life in prison. From the gallery, Lily's small voice broke the silence. "Daddy?" He turned just once to see her crying in his sister's arms. The officers led him away. Chapter 4, Life Behind Bars. Prison changes a man. It breaks some, hardens others. David spent the first year in solitary for his own protection. He wrote letters to Lily every week. Most came back unopened. By the 3rd year, he stopped writing. By the 5th, he'd forgotten the sound of his daughter's voice. But even in that darkness, one thing stayed constant, his innocence. He told anyone who'd listened, "I didn't do it." Most shrugged him off. Until one day, a new inmate arrived, a former paralegal named Marcus Lane. Serving time for fraud. Marcus listened carefully, then smiled. "You said they told you your fingerprints were on a glass?" David nodded. Marcus leaned forward. "That's a classic bluff. They use it when they have nothing." It was the first time in years someone believed him. Chapter 5, The Journalist. In 2006, a local investigative reporter named Claire Donovan started digging into old conviction cases tied to Detective Mercer's department. She was in her mid-30s, sharp-eyed and relentless. Her first discovery? 3 other men who had confessed under similar circumstances, all interrogated by Mercer. When she found David's file, she noticed the same patterns. No lawyer, long hours, missing audio segment from the tape. She decided to visit him. When she first sat across from him in the prison visitation room, David barely spoke. His beard had grown thick, his once broad shoulders now hunched. "Mr. Keller," she said gently, sliding a folder across the table. "I think they lied to you." For the first time in years, he looked someone in the eyes and saw something he'd forgotten existed. Hope. Chapter 6, The DNA. Claire's investigation uncovered something stunning. The so-called pending DNA results were never tested. The evidence bag, labeled Harper Crime Scene 98, was still sitting in a police storage locker, untouched for 8 years. When tested in 2007, it revealed a match, not to David Keller, but to another man, Rick Danner, a serial offender arrested in Michigan for similar crimes. The DNA results were sent to the county prosecutor, but weeks passed, then months. No response. It was as if the system couldn't afford to admit its mistake. Chapter 7, The Cover-Up. Detective Mercer had since been promoted. When confronted by Claire, he brushed it off. "We had a confession," he said. "That's good enough." She pressed harder. The missing audio segments, the forged reports, the medical examiner's inconsistencies. Then one night, Claire's car was broken into. Her laptop, containing all her case notes, was gone. The next day, she got an anonymous email. "Stop digging. Some ghosts should stay buried." But she didn't stop. Chapter 8, The Appeal. With Claire's help and the new DNA results, David's case went before the Ohio Court of Appeals in 2009. Prosecutors argued the confession was voluntary. The defense argued it was manufactured. In the courtroom, Claire sat beside David's sister, Mary, who clutched Lily's hand. Then, in a quiet, shaking voice, Lily, now a teenager, took the stand. "They told me my dad killed her. I believed them for years." Tears filled her eyes. "But my dad never even hurt a fly." The jury was silent. Even the judge lowered his gaze. Chapter 9, The Truth Comes Out. On October 22, 2009, the court vacated David Keller's conviction. After 12 years behind bars, the truth finally broke through. He walked out of Marion Correctional Facility into the golden afternoon light. Older, grayer, but free. Waiting for him outside were Claire and Lily. She hesitated for a moment, then ran into his arms. It was the first time he'd held her since she was 10 years old. Chapter 10, Redemption. In the years that followed, David rebuilt his life piece by piece. He took counseling, worked at a mechanic shop, and spoke at schools about coercion and justice reform. Claire's expose won national awards. Detective Mercer resigned under investigation, later stripped of his badge. And Lily? She started law school. When asked why, she smiled through tears. "Because I want to make sure what happened to my dad never happens again."
David Keller once believed that words could never be weapons, until his own were used to destroy him. He confessed to a murder he didn't commit. Because sometimes the system doesn't need guilt, only obedience. But in the end, truth doesn't break. It bends until someone refuses to stop pulling. This is Justice Uncovered, uncovering the truth one case at a time. If the story moved you, share it and help keep the fight for justice alive. Subscribe now to never miss the next story.